Our two-story house in Millbrook, a sleepy little hamlet, wasn't beautiful, but it was home. Despite our lack of swimming pool luxury, my sister Jane and I were never without the support of our parents, who were both teachers at the local school. Somehow, they always managed to find a method to make a teacher's compensation go farther. To put it simply, Jane was my best friend, my older sister, and everything else I lacked. She was like a spark that ignited every place she stepped into, in contrast to my preference for the solitary companionship of literature and sketching pads. As far back as I can remember, my sister and I used to play pretend to be explorers or princesses, and climb the ancient oak tree in our garden. Before our paths began to separate, those were easier days. Our dissimilarities became more apparent as we matured. Jane was the antithesis of me. She was gregarious, gifted, and seemed flawless in every respect. She was a basketball superstar in addition to being the star of every school play, writing poetry that moved our English teacher to tears. At the same time, I was simply there, the reserved individual who prefers to spend her lunch breaks in the library engrossed in a book rather than braving the bustling restaurant. At least in public, our parents never showed favoritism. They were just as pleased over Jane's successes as they had been over my respectable marks and understated achievements. However, there was an underlying consensus that Jane was meant for bigger things. As the admission letters began to arrive, Jane's acceptance to Riverside University, one of the state's most distinguished institutions, came as no surprise. The day she received her letter is a date I'll never forget. Because it was so wonderful, Mom and Dad started crying. "Our baby's going to Riverside," Mom yelled out as she embraced Jane tightly. "We always knew you were special," Dad remarked, reaching out to relatives over the phone. "Were you alerted? Jane received a full academic scholarship to attend Riverside." We started to really diverge from one another at that point. We still love each other, yet paths diverged due to the inevitable forces of life. While Jane headed for the city, I lingered in our childhood home, still searching for my place in the world. The challenges that would later test our sisterly bond would have been beyond my wildest dreams. That a single golden ring would shatter everything we'd built over the years and force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and forgiveness. The phone calls home from Jane became a weekly ritual of success stories and achievements. Each time I'd sit at the kitchen table, watching Mom's face light up as Jane shared her latest triumph at Riverside. "Did you hear?" Mom would gush to anyone who'd listen. Jane's research paper was published in the University Psychology Journal. She's only a sophomore, and she's maintaining a 4.0 GPA while doing all this extra research. Dad would chime in. "That's our girl." Spent those 2 years after high school working at the local diner, saving what I could for community college. When I finally enrolled at Millbrook Community College, my parents managed to smile and say, "That's nice, dear." It wasn't Riverside, but it was something. "You know, Jane was on local TV again yesterday," Mom announced during dinner one evening. They interviewed her about her research on childhood development. She looked so professional. "That's great," I mumbled, pushing my peas around my plate. I worked hard at my studies. I really did. But somehow getting an A+ in Introduction to Business didn't quite measure up to Jane's published papers and television appearances. My achievements were like candlelight next to her spotlight. After graduation, reality hit hard. While Jane was already establishing herself at Preston Medical Center as a rising star in their psychology department, I was dropping off resumes at local businesses with no callbacks. That's how I ended up working at Aunt Sarah's store as an assistant administrator. She took me on with that look of pity I was getting used to seeing. "It's just temporary," Aunt Sarah said, showing me around, "until you find something more suitable for someone with a degree." Then came the news that changed everything. Jane called one Sunday evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I met someone," she squealed over speakerphone. "His name is Michael, and he's a lawyer at Blackwell and Associates. His family owns half the buildings downtown." I watched my parents exchange knowing looks of approval. Of course, Jane would find someone as successful as she was. "He's taking me to Paris next month," Jane continued. "His family has an apartment there. Can you believe it?" "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom exclaimed while Dad beamed with pride. I sat there in my old sweatpants, still living in my childhood bedroom, making minimum wage at my aunt's store. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Jane, the successful psychologist dating a wealthy lawyer, and me, the underachieving sister who couldn't seem to get her life started. "When do we get to meet him?" Mom asked eagerly. "Soon. He's taking me to that new French restaurant this weekend, but maybe next week we could come for dinner." I excused myself from the kitchen before they could see the tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Jane. I was. But each of her successes somehow felt like they were highlighting my failures. Every step forward she took seemed to push me 2 steps back in comparison. Holidays became a showcase of Jane's exciting life. She'd sweep into our parents' house like a celebrity, bringing stories of important clients, breakthrough therapy sessions, and glamorous dates with Michael. And then the CEO himself thanked me in front of the entire board, she'd say over Thanksgiving dinner while I quietly passed the mashed potatoes. "Tell him about that conference in Boston, honey," Mom would prompt, beaming with pride. I'd sit there in my work clothes from the store, still living in my childhood bedroom, because minimum wage doesn't get you your own apartment in this economy. Even my aunt's employee discount couldn't help me save enough to move out. Then came the announcement we all knew was coming. It was during Christmas dinner when Jane stood up, Michael beside her, both grinning ear to ear. "We're getting married," she squealed, extending her left hand to reveal a stunning gold ring with a diamond that caught every light in the room. "It's been in my family for generations," Michael explained proudly. "My great-grandfather gave it to my great-grandmother in 1925. Mom burst into tears of joy. Dad opened his best bottle of wine. I forced a smile while something heavy settled in my stomach. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Jane was at the house constantly, turning our modest home into wedding planning central. Every surface seemed covered with bridal magazines, color swatches, and guest lists. One Saturday in early spring, I had a rare day off. I was sprawled on my bed with my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice when I heard Jane and Mom in the garden below my window. "These roses will look perfect for the reception," Jane was saying. "We should plant more along this fence." "Careful with your ring, sweetie," Mom cautioned. "Those thorns can catch on anything." "You're right," Jane replied. "This glove keeps catching on it. I'll just put it here on the bench for now." I returned to my book, half listening to their chatter about flower arrangements and table settings. The afternoon sun was warm through my window, and I was just getting to my favorite part when I heard Mom's voice. "We should get more fertilizer if we're planting all these new roses. Let's run to the garden center." "Good idea," Jane agreed. "Chris, we're going to the store. Be back soon." I mumbled an acknowledgement, too engrossed in my book to really pay attention. The house felt quiet except for the distant sound of birds in the garden. When they returned, the peace was shattered by Jane's panicked voice. "Mom, Mom, the ring, it's gone." I looked up from my book at the commotion. Through my window, I could see Jane and Mom frantically searching around the wooden bench, pushing aside gardening tools and flower pots. "It was right here." Jane's voice was getting higher with panic. "I put it right here on the bench." "Don't worry, honey. We'll find it," Mom assured her, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "It has to be here somewhere." They searched until the sun started to set, combing through every inch of the garden, but the ring was nowhere to be found. That's when I first saw it in their eyes. When they looked up at my window, that flicker of suspicion would soon grow into something much darker. With shaking hands, Jane dialed Michael's number. I could hear his voice through the phone from across the room, growing louder with each word. "What do you mean you lost it?" His voice boomed through the speaker. "That ring has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother wore that ring through 2 world wars." "I'm so sorry," Jane sobbed. "We'll find it, I promise." "You'd better find it." The violence in his voice made me flinch. "I don't care what it takes. That ring is irreplaceable." After she hung up, Jane turned to me, her face twisted with an expression I'd never seen before. "You took it, didn't you?" "What?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "Jane, I was in my room the whole time." "Exactly?" She screamed, mascara running down her cheeks. "You were the only one here. Christina, if you took the ring, you need to return it right now," Mom said, stepping forward, her face hard. "I didn't take anything," I said, my voice cracking. "I swear." "Then you won't mind if we search your room," Dad said, already heading for the stairs. I followed them up to my bedroom, watching helplessly as they tore it apart. They rifled through my drawers, emptied my jewelry box, flipped my mattress, and dumped out my purse. Books scattered across the floor. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Even my private diary was read, page by page. "It has to be here somewhere," Jane muttered, throwing my sweaters onto the floor. Hours of searching turned into days, then a week. Each day, the accusations grew worse. "Just admit it," Jane cornered me in the kitchen one morning. "We all know you took it because you're jealous. You can't stand that I'm getting married while you can't even get a date." "Jane, please." "Look at you," she spat, 27 years old, living with Mom and Dad, working a pathetic job that Aunt Sarah gave you out of pity. "You're a loser, Christina, and you couldn't stand to see me happy." Mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "We're going to call the police if you don't return it." "Go ahead," I shouted back, finally breaking. "Call them. I have nothing to hide because I didn't take your precious ring." Each word was like a knife cutting deeper than the last. The worst part wasn't the accusations or the threats. It was the look in their eyes, the absolute certainty that I was guilty, that I was capable of betraying my own sister out of jealousy and spite. Word spreads fast in a small town. Within days, my parents' version of events had reached every corner of Millbrook. At the grocery store, former neighbors avoided my gaze. At church, people who'd known me since childhood suddenly found reasons to sit in different pews. I was restocking shelves at my aunt's store when I heard her voice behind me. "Christina." Aunt Sarah's tone made me freeze. "We need to talk." In her small office, she didn't even offer me a seat. "Your mother called me this morning." "Aunt Sarah, please." She held up her hand. "I took a chance on you when no one else would, and this is how you repay me. By stealing your sister's engagement ring." "I didn't." "Clean out your locker and turn in your keys." Her voice was ice. "I won't have a thief working in my store." The walk home felt like a death march. Maybe Mom and Dad would finally see how this was destroying my life. Maybe they'd realize I would never do this. I found them in the kitchen. "Aunt Sarah fired me," I said, my voice small. Mom didn't even look up from her coffee. "Pack your things." "What?" "You heard your mother," Dad said. "We want you out by tomorrow morning." The room started spinning. "You're kicking me out. Where am I supposed to go?" "Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole from your sister." Mom finally looked at me, her eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. "You brought shame to this family, Christina." "I can't even look my friends in the face anymore." "I'm your daughter," I whispered. "No daughter of mine would do what you've done." Her words cut like glass. "You have until morning." I stumbled upstairs in a daze, pulling my old gym bag from the closet. How do you pack up a life in one bag? Which pieces of yourself do you choose to take? Clothes went in first, enough for a week, maybe 2. One pair of sensible shoes, my laptop wrapped in a sweater. Then came the harder choices. The books that had been my friends when I had none. Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Little Women. Stories of other women who had to find their way in a hostile world. Through it all, I couldn't stop crying. These walls had heard my first words, seen my first steps. This room had been my refuge through every storm of my life. Now it was just another place I wasn't welcome. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends. I can't believe you would do this. And how could you? Don't contact me again. Sitting on my stripped bed, surrounded by the remnants of my life, I realized there was nothing left for me in Millbrook. Every bridge was burned, every door closed. Whatever I was going to become, it wouldn't be here. I had to leave, not just this house, but this town, these memories, this life that had become a prison of accusations and distrust. Somewhere out there, I had to believe was a place where I could start over. A place where no one knew me as the sister who stole the ring, the daughter who betrayed her family, the girl who wasn't good enough. At 3:00 a.m., while staring at my phone's dwindling contact list, I remembered Rachel. We'd been close in college before life pulled us in different directions. My fingers shook as I dialed her number, praying she still used it. "Chris," her voice was groggy with sleep. "What's wrong?" The whole story poured out of me between sobs. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I have a spare room," she said finally. "I'm in Portland now. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." I checked my bank account. $342.17, just enough for a one-way bus ticket to Oregon and maybe a meal or two. "When can you come?" Rachel asked. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "I have to leave tomorrow." The bus ride took 2 days. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the familiar landscapes of my life fade into unknown territory. My gym bag sat on my lap like a life preserver. Everything I now owned contained in one small space. Rachel was waiting at the station, just like she promised. She hugged me without hesitation, and for the first time in weeks, I felt human again. "The store where I work is hiring," she said as we drove to her apartment. "It's just retail, but it's something." I started the next day. The store manager took one look at my business degree and my desperate eyes, then handed me a name tag. "You start on Register 3. I threw myself into the work like it was a lifeline. Every shift, every sale, every minute was 1 minute further from Millbrook and the wreckage I'd left behind. When other employees complained about long hours, I volunteered to stay longer. When they grumbled about difficult customers, I took them on with a smile. 3 months in, they made me a floor supervisor. 2 months after that, assistant manager. By the 8-month mark, I was managing my own department. "You're different from most people we promote," my district manager said during my review. "You have hunger." He was right. I was hungry, not just for success, but for vindication, for proof that I could be more than what my family thought I was. The day I signed the lease on my own apartment was the day I finally felt free. It was small, just a studio with a kitchenette, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave. No one could search through my things. No one could question my right to be there. I changed my phone number that same day, deleted every social media account, erased every digital footprint that could lead back to Millbrook. Rachel thought I was being extreme. She didn't argue. "They're still your family," she said once carefully. "No," I replied, unpacking boxes in my new place. "Family believes in you. Family stands by you. They stopped being my family the day they chose not to believe me." At night, in my new bed, in my new life, I sometimes wondered about them. Was Jane married now? Did Mom still garden? Did Dad still read the paper every morning at the kitchen table? But wondering was dangerous. Wondering led to doubting, and doubting led to that dark place where I questioned everything, including myself. So I focused on work, on building something new, on becoming someone who couldn't be dismissed or discarded, someone who didn't need anyone else's approval or belief, someone who could survive being erased from her own family story. Despite my best efforts to move forward, there were nights when curiosity got the better of me. On those nights, I'd ask Rachel to check Jane's social media accounts from her phone. She got married, Rachel told me one evening, scrolling through photos. Big white dress, church wedding. Your parents look happy in the pictures. I nodded, pretending the information didn't cut like a knife. A year later, she's pregnant, Rachel reported, showing me a photo of Jane cradling her belly. Michael's hand protectively placed over hers. She looked radiant. For years, it was just me, building my new life in Portland while getting occasional glimpses of my old one through Rachel's phone screen. For years, I watched my family's life continue without me through carefully curated photos and posts that never mentioned the missing daughter, the lost sister. Then came the call that changed everything. Chris, Rachel's voice was breathless. You need to see this. She sent me a screenshot of Jane's latest post. To my sister, Christina, I'm sorry. I was wrong. If anyone knows where she is, please help me find her. I need to make this right. Please share this post. Help me find my sister. I stared at the words until they blurred. It's probably some kind of trick, I said finally. I don't think so, Rachel replied softly. Look at the comments. Your parents are there too, begging you to contact them. My hands shook as I read their comment. Mom, please come home. Sweetheart, we need to talk to you. Please give us a chance, Dad said. After 4 years of silence, their words seemed surreal, but something in their desperation felt genuine. I called the old house number, half expecting it to be disconnected. Mom, she answered on the first ring. Hello. Her voice hadn't changed. It's me, I said quietly. There was a sharp intake of breath. Christina. Oh, God. I could hear her crying, calling for Dad. Their voices tumbled over each other. Please come home. We need to see you. There's something you need to know. I can come next weekend, I heard myself say. The drive back to Millbrook was the longest of my life. Each mile marker brought back memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The town looked exactly the same, as if it had been frozen in time while I'd been away. Jane's car was in the driveway when I arrived. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the familiar path to the front door. They were all waiting in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Jane. For years had changed them too. Mom's hair was grayer, Dad looked smaller somehow, and Jane was holding a sleeping baby, about 4 years old, on her lap. We found it, Mom said, her voice breaking. The ring, we found it. Dad stepped forward. We were replanting the roses last week, and there it was, tangled in the roots right where I knocked it off the bench that day. Jane finished, tears streaming down her face. The ring fell, and then we covered it with soil while planting. It's been there all this time, growing deeper with the roses. The revelation broke something in all of us. Suddenly, the living room was filled with raw, uncontrolled sobbing. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms, her whole body shaking. Dad's quiet composure finally cracked as tears streaming down his weathered face. Jane sank to her knees, her cries waking her sleeping son. And I, after 4 years of holding everything inside, of being strong, of surviving, I finally let go. The tears came in waves, years of pain and loneliness pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. I'm so sorry, Chris, Jane choked out between gasps. I was horrible to you. cruel, unforgivable. I let my fear and Michael's anger cloud my judgment. I chose to believe the worst about my own sister. Mom reached for my hand, but stopped short, uncertain. "We failed you as parents," she whispered through her tears. "We should have believed in you, protected you. Instead, She couldn't finish. "Please," Jane pleaded, "tell us how to make this right. I'll do anything. We all will." I looked at them, these people who had once been my whole world, then my worst nightmare, and now I wasn't sure what they were. "I can't just pretend the last 4 years didn't happen," I said finally, wiping my eyes. "You didn't just accuse me. You condemned me, turned the whole town against me, threw me out with nothing but a gym bag and no place to go. What if—" Mom hesitated, then continued, "what if we saw someone? A family therapist. Someone who could help us rebuild what we broke. Once a month," Dad added quickly, his voice still thick with emotion. "As long as it takes." It was with a start that I noticed the small youngster curled up on the couch, my nephew. He shared the black hair of Michael with Jane and her nose. An aunt had been absent from his life for a long time. "I am not relocating to Millbrook," I declared with conviction. "Portland is now my home." "Well done. Allies who never abandoned me when I needed them most." "We get it," Jane remarked. "We don't deserve to have you back in our lives, but if you're willing to try even a little—" I was hesitant to consent to my first vacation visit for 3 months. "Thank you." I enlisted Rachel's help as a support system. The dinner was uncomfortable since everyone was too shy to bring up certain subjects. Still, it was a beginning. In our sessions with Dr. Martins, our family therapist, she guides us through the more challenging topics. We discuss honesty and deceit, the burden of anticipation, and the poison of presumptions. When we leave her sessions, we may feel furious or upset, as if we have reopened old wounds. But we're getting better at listening to one another, little by little. My nephew Tommy, who is Jane's son, is the simplest part. Preschoolers don't hold resentment or guilt against their relatives. He just thinks of me as Aunt Chris, the one who teaches him to sketch and brings him books from Portland. His pure love connects our past selves to our potential selves. Roses that bloomed 4 years ago in Mom's garden are still blooming now. Whenever I see them, I can't help but reflect on how easily preconceptions and accusations may encase the truth, much like a ring in the earth. But the truth, like those roses, rises to the top in the end. When I left Millbrook with my gym bag and my heart broken, I was a different person. The ones that expelled me are different from these people. Healing, like gardening, requires time, patience, and continual attention, as we are all discovering. Even if some days are more challenging than others, we persevere.